In this lesson, we are going to look at what influences there are on what we choose to eat, or why do we eat what we eat. So the things that we're going to cover is why do we eat what we eat and why does it matter? How much are individuals responsible for their food choices? And how can we promote healthier food environments? So food environments is a term that we will go over a little bit later. So to start off, I want you to decide if you agree with the following statement. Individuals are responsible for their own food choices. Do you agree or disagree? So if you chose that people are not fully responsible for their choices, who or what is responsible for them? That is what we're going to go over today. If you do think that individuals are responsible for their own choices, I want you to look at some of the factors that I go over in the next few slides and see if that changes your mind. It might or it might not. So this is something we've gone over before. We're just going to vaguely go over it very quickly. In order to eat a healthy diet, the average of your meals should look like this, is that half of them are fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables, that you get about a quarter of your calories from whole grains and a quarter of them from healthy protein choices. And then making sure that you're eating healthy oils, things like olive oil or canola oil or avocados and nuts even. And then making sure you're drinking plenty of water or other beverages that have no sugar in them. And just remembering that if you're drinking milk or juice, that those have a lot of calories in them and count towards these things down here. And trying to avoid very sugary drinks like Gatorade or soda. So what this could look like when we're thinking of these, is our meal complete? Is something missing? Is there any excess? This is obviously not a real meal, but this shows options of what you could eat that would fit the criteria of proteins, fruits and vegetables, and whole grains. So some options that this could look like. Here's what you typically see if you look up healthy meals. They show like a whole grain rice or other carbohydrate, some very lean protein like chicken or fish, and then fruits and vegetables. And here they add in some cheese, which does give proteins and some fats. So this is what you see as a typical healthy meal, but this might not be what you want to eat at every meal, and that is totally fine. So some other things that also fit in that criteria, we have our Mexican food here where you get plenty of vegetables in our lettuce, guacamole, and salsa. You have chicken and then beans and corn tortillas, which are nice whole grains. And even something like eating a burger would work if you eat that burger on a whole grain bun and then have a side salad with it. This fits all the criteria for getting whole grains, proteins, and vegetables in your meal. So since there's so many options for what can make a healthy meal, I want us to think of what barriers can prevent people from eating them. If we have so many options, why aren't people eating healthy all the time? So a lot of things have an influence on our food choices. And those different influences are going to impact what we choose to eat. So what we choose to eat, we call a food environment. And this is something that's created by social structures, cultural, economic, physical, and political factors that are going to impact how accessible and available food is within your community. So that's a big definition, and we're going to break that down into 4 different pieces and go over some questions that you can ask to see how available food is to you. The first one I want to visit is the physical environment. So this is anything that you could physically see or interact with. So this could be something like, what stores do you buy food from? What stores are in your area? How far away is the grocery store from your house? How do you store food at home? Do you have a big fridge, or do you not have access to a fridge that you can put fresh food in? And then even what ads do you see for food? So advertisements and marketing is going to really affect what foods we think of, what foods we desire. So depending on how much advertisement you see, that could affect what food choices you're making. Beyond the physical is also your social environment. So this has to do with the people you socialize with and also the culture that you're coming from. So what foods are popular in your country? We in the United States are going to eat completely different meals than if you were in China. What foods are popular in your family's culture? So even though we're all in the same country, our families all have different backgrounds, and maybe we eat according to our nationalities or other cultural influences like religion, or even what region of a country you're from. And then, what food does your family cook? So the foods that you are going to consider your base or like your normal foods are probably the things that your parents gave you growing up, or that your family made when you were a kid. So what food does your family cook at home or eat at home? Next up is individual. So these are the things where you really make your own choices. These are your preferences or the things that you choose to do because of your own knowledge and beliefs. So what foods taste good to you? What foods make you feel good or bad? So do you feel tired if you eat certain foods? Or do you feel great and energetic if you eat other foods? Do you have allergies or food sensitivities? That's obviously going to impact what foods you're able to eat. And then are there ethical choices that you make towards your food? So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan for social or environmental reasons, or are there foods that you avoid because of your religion? These are all choices that you personally make every day when you choose which foods to eat. And then lastly is the policy environment. And this is something that is a little more vague, or you might not see or consider a lot of the time, is that there are a lot of laws and regulations about foods. So depending on what foods you're allowed to have in your country, there are some foods that may not be available to you. The laws that affect food marketing. So what foods are able to advertise and where do they advertise and when do they advertise? What laws affect food prices? So there are things called food subsidies that the government will pay farmers or other food producers so that they can keep the cost of their foods down. So if food is cheaper, you're more likely to be buying it. How well funded are nutrition programs? So things like SNAP, where you can get money for food if you have lost your job or you just don't have enough money to pay for nutritious food. Are those programs funded and are they easy to get involved with? And then last, what are the rules concerning school meal plans? So this is something you may or may not know about, but each state has specific laws about what has to be included and what can't be included in a school lunch in a public school. So depending on where you live, you may be offered completely different meals. So there are two examples here. The video is going to pause so you can look at these different food environments. And I want you to think of what types of meals these two different kids are going to eat. So the first is Lydia, who lives in a city. And I'll let you read this part and give your reaction. Our second food environment is John. So John is living in a rural community. So he is a very different situation than Lydia. So I want you to read his situation and come up with what you think he would eat on a daily basis. Okay, so hopefully when you looked at these food environments, we see that each of them have very different environments, from the social and cultural to the physical, to maybe even the political or policy environments that affect their food choices. So you chose what kind of meal each character ate. And I want you to think of what barriers might prevent them from eating healthy meals. What are the differences between the two food environments? And finally, what do you think could be done to improve each food environment? So if you could make one change to Lydia or John's life, what would that be? So now the last thing I want us to do is to think of our own food environment. So obviously we have not been at school yet, but if you think of your past school experiences, I want you to reflect on the following questions. What foods are prepared through the school food system? How many vending machines did you have, and how healthy are the options that they have? Did your school have a vegetable garden or access to free, fresh foods? Did students buy food from nearby restaurants, and if so, which ones? And what food advertisements do you see near school? This last thing is just going to go over if you want to see what Americans' average eating habits are versus what the recommendations are. So some things that are very healthy for us, we are not getting enough of, and some things that are not as great for us, we are eating too much of. So I want you to think of why you think we might be eating this way. So there are a lot of answers to those questions, and it's not a simple answer. There's no right or wrong statement. There are a few things that I think can be pointed out. One is that the things that we like to eat or we are eating a lot of are things that generally taste good to people. Humans like to eat sugar, we like to eat fats, and we like to eat salty foods. That's just things that we crave. So obviously, if they're available to us, that's going to be something we prefer to eat. The other thing is that the price and availability of these things is very different. So if you are eating whole grains and lots of fruits and vegetables, that could be a very expensive bill versus if you are eating packaged foods, you can get the same amount of calories for a lot cheaper, and they're a lot easier to store. Things like whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, you have to make sure you're going to the store every few days or at least once a week to make sure you have a fresh supply. So that might not be doable for everybody. And the last thing I'm just going to flick through these if you are interested in seeing how our consumption has changed over the years. Our calories between 1970 to 2000 have increased by about 500 calories per day, generally because our serving sizes are a little bit bigger. The amount of sugar we eat has increased by 11%. The amount of soda that we drink has tripled, again, mostly because of serving sizes. The amount of fruits and vegetables we've eaten has also increased, so this is not all bad news. We still are a little short of our recommended values, but we have increased the availability of fruits and vegetables in our diets, which is great. And then another interesting change is our snacking habits have doubled. So we have doubled the amount of food that we consume during snacks or not during regular meal times, and they're about a fifth or 20% of our total calories are coming from things like soda, desserts, pizza, and things that we eat outside of regular meal times. So this just shows a way that culturally our dining habits have changed over time. Okay, so this is the end. And I want you to think back to that first question I asked you of whether or not individuals are responsible for their own food choices and why or why not. So after you have looked at these different food environments, after we've talked about all of the outside factors and pressures that are going to determine what foods you choose, has your answer changed? Do you think that individuals are completely responsible for their food choices? Or do you think that maybe there are other factors that come into play and we can't fully take responsibility for that?